So I always have to decide which hat to wear because I did it in 1996 as an SEO technology company, and still doing SEO in that business 26 years later, but we made 11 acquisitions to become a full service agency. We still do a tremendous amount of paid search in that business, but I started a nonprofit a couple of years ago called Giving Forward, and that's also a passion of mine. So I thought I would sort of wear the Giving Forward and the Did It hat today to talk about future marketing in a cookieless world, because it's to some extent back to the future, because regardless of how old you are, probably at least when you were young, there were no cookies and no digital marketing, but it depends how old you are. So the loss of the third-party cookie is a big deal in the digital marketing ecosystem, and simultaneously with the loss of the third-party cookie, which is already fully gone in Safari, fully gone in most people who are using Firefox, and it's on its way out in Google Chrome. We also have the elimination of IDFA, which was the identifier within the iPhone, and there's also an identifier in every Android phone, which is also being removed by Google. The reason that's an important change is that a lot of the marketing that marketers are used to using allow us to use those unique identifiers either on an anonymized basis or with personally identifiable information merged in with either the cookie or the IDFA or the Android identifier. So as you lose that ability to do essentially one-to-one targeting, you have to change the way you think about your digital marketing. So when you're doing that, obviously you're going to lose the ability to capture certain audiences. But simultaneously with that, the other thing that's happening with the loss of the third-party cookie is tracking is getting a lot more opaque, because you used to be able to use third-party cookies to track success metrics or KPIs. And so what I'll be talking about is the extent to which we can find substitutes or alternatives to the methods of targeting and the methods of tracking that we become sort of somewhat used to over the years. Obviously, before the internet, marketing existed, right? And they even named some channels of marketing or types of marketing after the kinds of audiences that would listen to those types of media. So, for example, people may not even be aware of the fact that soap operas are called soap operas because they're sponsored by soap companies, right? So you would hit that demographic of audience by advertising on soap operas, and people may not realize, unless you bought a lot of radio advertising, traditional broadcast radio, that they call the most popular time of the day for radio advertising drive time, because you're sitting in your car driving. And so, there were all sorts of ways that you could target before. We all got really spoiled with third-party cookies, and now to some extent we have to go back to the future. The first thing you need to think about as you try to replace the ability to hyper-target using third-party cookies is what's your balance between using paid media or earned media with regards to substituting against what you're doing now. And often people don't think about the earned media bucket of marketing as a substitute for the loss of the third-party cookie, but it can actually end up being a really valuable channel, right? Because SEO continues to be very popular because it's people who raise their hand and have a very strong interest in a particular topic or category. And so to the extent that visibility of content is open to you as a marketer because your domain is old enough and has enough domain authority, which we don't really like to use that term, but it's sort of the generic term for the fact that Google thinks your domain is authoritative. You can also do PR and digital PR as an alternative to sort of paid media. And then there's the sort of fuzzy areas within social media and within influencer marketing where it might be free, like earned media, or it might be paid, particularly once you move into influencer marketing. So some of those become substitutes because if you know an influencer and you know who the influencer's fans are, if those match up against who you're trying to reach, then that can actually be a really viable alternative to sort of cookie level, highly granular targeting. But you need to decide what your marketing objectives are. Like, what are the KPIs that you're trying to optimize against? Because that will help you decide which of the channel mix changes you make, right? Because if you're very, very direct response focused and you're really looking at the bottom of the funnel, you're going to be using a different set of KPIs than if you're trying to do branding and awareness as a marketer, right? You need both. If you're a very direct response marketer, if you're basically looking for sales or leads, usually you'll be doing a lot of demand harvesting as opposed to demand creation. And the reason I call it demand harvesting is because those people already have an interest in what it is that you do or what it is that you sell. And so to the extent that those people are already raising their hands in search results, by looking at search results, doing searches, and either interacting with paid search results or organic free search results, that tends to be very bottom of the funnel. You can also use social media and sometimes programmatic display at the bottom of the funnel as well. So deciding whether you're trying to lift branding and awareness metrics or you're trying to lift direct response metrics will determine what mix of media you use. So the way I like to think about earned media visibility is that they're no longer as siloed as they used to be. It used to be that there was a team in charge of SEO, and they were told, hey, here's our domain, here's our website, we're trying to figure out how to get it to rank higher. And so they would, learn SEO, they would learn technical SEO, which is making your site search engine friendly, making sure that all the content is really well described, using title tags properly, making sure that your site loads quickly. Now SEO on a technical level, it includes something called Core Web Vitals, which Google just rolled out, which basically tries to mimic how user-friendly your site is. Is it good for the user? Is it a good user experience? And so Google is now grading your site against Core Web Vitals. But the thing is now SEO touches so many of these other circles in the Venn diagram because there are interaction effects between the other things that you do, digital PR, influencer marketing, traditional PR, social media. Those all have interaction effects with your search visibility, both from the perspective of your actual domain, but also from the perspective of the entire search engine results page, right? Because the best way to think about SEO is not exclusively to think about, can I get my domain to rank higher and the content that is on my domain, but it's really how much of the screen real estate on a search engine results page for a critical search can I control? And that's where digital PR and influencer marketing can be really powerful, for example, and social media for that matter, right? Because if you do a search, you start to think about, well, what other domains do tend to rank really highly for these kinds of searches? And often there'll be social media sites, like publishing something on LinkedIn might have a better chance of ranking than ranking on your site, right? Or getting something published on Forbes or Fortune magazine, or cat enthusiast if you sell cat toys, right? So deciding where your content lives and how you can control the most screen real estate in a search engine results page is really powerful. So that's why when we think about earned media, we don't think about earned media silos with regards to SEO, influencer marketing, PR, digital PR, and social media. We really think about them holistically because you're not quite as happy if you get a link, something to show up in the search results page and they end up on your YouTube account as you might be if they got to your homepage. But it's close. It's one click away from your homepage. And hopefully you've got great content on your YouTube page. And so that might be just as good. And it might not even be your YouTube page, right? Maybe you did an interview with somebody and it's their YouTube page, but your link is active in the description, right? That's also great. So I always say when people think about SEO and PR and digital PR, they should really think about them as holistically as possible, because you can, through concerted effort over time, create a content creation engine that allows you to really dominate the search engine results for the topics that you want to be showing up for. And these days, you want to control the visual elements of the search engine results page as well. So here's an example of a search engine results page. It includes what's called a local pack, a pack of results which are hyperlocal, because Google imputes whether or not there's local intent in a search, and then if there's local intent, it'll show a local pack. It also imputes whether there's likely to be interest in video. So you've all done Google searches where it mixes videos in with the search results, or you've seen news results, or you've seen social media results mixed in with the regular search results. And so you have to think about all those other sort of buckets of content types. Of course, the second largest search engine is not Bing, it's YouTube, right? And so video content ends up being really important. I'm creating video content right now. It's going to rank for something. I have no idea what. Or maybe it won't rank for anything at all, and I'll just use it in social media. But I'm creating this content, and it'll be valuable. Now, maybe it's not necessarily only valuable in its entirety. Maybe I'll slice it up into snackable bits if I get my hands on it, if Aaron lets me get my hands on it, or Aaron will slice it up into snackable bits and put it up on the Digimarcon social media, right? Because not everyone wants to sit through 30 minutes of me talking. Everyone's got ADD, so you might need to slice it up. And the nice thing about slicing things up when you create video is that if a person covers a lot of topics, each of them has an opportunity to rank independently when you slice it up. So make use of the fact that second largest search engine is also owned by Google, and it's YouTube, and you can do very hyper-specific little segments. Sometimes people, when they're doing a video search result, they'll look at how long the video is. You notice it when next time you look at a search result that has videos in it, it tells you how long it is. So people will actually sometimes, if they're only in the mood to really get the exact answer, they'll pick something that's 2 minutes and 35 seconds over something that's 23 minutes and 15 seconds, right? So try to repurpose all your video content. Again, you're grabbing a greater share of the search engine results page by doing that. Now you can use paid media on top of your earned media and amplify some of it. And the first time that this really got used heavily was in social media, right? Within social media, when they rolled out ads in social media, you were boosting your organic posts, right? You took an organic post and you chose to turn it into an ad. And of course, eventually you started doing posts which you knew you were going to turn into ads. So you can amplify the content that's working, figure out if it's working and choose to amplify it sometimes within a platform like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Or you can have that content actually sit on your domain, right? Almost every social media platform and YouTube allows for something that's called an embed, right? And what an embed means is you can actually take that post and you can put it on your own blog or on your own website. That means you just got an extra bite out of that apple, right? Because it lives in YouTube, but now it lives separately with a different abstract and some different copy written about it on your own site. So if you're sensing a theme here, you're trying to continue to reuse that content as much as possible. And if the content is really great and conveys a halo effect towards you or your brand, you might even choose to do paid advertising against it. So this talk might be so great that I actually choose to spend paid media dollars to get people to it, because the halo effect of me having Digimarcon around me conveys that I'm a subject matter expert. Hopefully what I'm saying also conveys that. But having the halo effect of where you are and that kind of thing can be really valuable. That's why hopefully many of you are involved in your industry trade associations and trying to build your personal brands at the same time. Part of getting any kind of marketing and media effective is just getting the right message to the right individuals at the right time. Every single thing that you're all selling is quite different, and sometimes the message is wasted if it's the wrong message or the right message at the wrong time. Some things people are only in market for in a very narrow time period. So if you think about, if you're in the business of selling honeymoon vacations, how often are people looking for honeymoon vacations? Hopefully not that often, because hopefully they're only getting married once or twice or 3 times. So hopefully, they're not in market for honeymoon vacations very often. And so getting that right message at the right time to those people for that niche is pretty critical. Now, there are some people who are lucky enough to be in industries where you can get a message in front of people much more frequently. There's stuff where, categories where 1/3 of the US population is in that market at any given time. Things like replacing your cell phone or dieting or dating, right? Those things, you don't have to be quite as niche in your messaging and your targeting as you do for honeymoon vacations or something else much more niche. But think about the messaging that you're going to use against the individuals as you find them and the types of targeting that you'll use. So we're losing some of the behavioral targeting as a result of the third-party cookie deprecation and the IDFA going away. But you can still use custom audiences. So custom audiences are a process by which you have a pre-existing relationship with somebody, so you have their email address or you have their cell phone number. You can upload that into Facebook, for example, or Google or some of the other platforms, and they will use what's called an anonymized hash to match it up against their audience, and so you can reach them. That can be really powerful because you may know that these individuals either are pre-existing customers of yours or they're in your pipeline and you want to try to figure out how to get them across the finish line. You can use third-party data. This is getting more scarce, right, as a result of the third-party cookie going away, because most of the third-party data providers use the third-party cookie to get the data into the ad targeting engines. But there are some replacements for that. We'll talk a little bit more about the category, demographic, and device type and other levers that you have at your disposal. So social media platforms still know who you are, right? And some of them also know what you like. Facebook had an amazing engine that worked in mobile and desktop. Now, because of the IDFA going away, they don't know that you like golf when you're on your mobile device. They only know that you like golf when you're on your desktop device. So you can still do a lot of that really great granular targeting, but you may not have the scale or the reach that you would have had previously. Publishers, a lot of larger publishers, are developing their own taxonomies of what your interests are because, for example, if you're on the New York Times or Washington Post or Fox News website and you're interacting with certain types of articles and content in a logged in state, they're actually building a data profile for you just within that specific publisher, and then they offer that up to advertisers. And so you can use that kind of data as well. These are sort of alternative IDs to sort of a unified global ID. The Trade Desk and some of the other platforms are trying to sort of recreate the cookie with a unified ID. There's Newstar, which has its own anonymized personal identifier. There's the Brightpool ID. None of these have reached anywhere close to the scale of the third-party cookie. So they're all, to some extent, Band-Aids that the industry is running around trying to apply to regain the scale that it had with third-party cookies. But that's just for behavioral audiences. So the custom audiences I touched on a little bit more earlier. Once you've got a great list, you can actually take that list and create an anonymized audience within these platforms and some others as well. And that can be really, really powerful. That's why email list building is no longer just about being able to mail to them, right? As a matter of fact, a lot of email marketers were in the mindset like, oh, they unsubscribed, I can get rid of this email address now because I'm not allowed to mail them anymore. Well, you might not be able to email them anymore, but you can still use them in a custom audience. So don't throw the email address away just because the person unsubscribed. Just put it into a different data file and use it for a different purpose. Context is extremely important, right? What a person is reading, the content they are consuming at that instant in time tells you a whole lot about them, right? And you can decide how granular as a marketer you want to use context as a targeting vehicle. You can go down to the keyword level, right? So this is a page on Bob Vila about how to sharpen your chainsaw, right? That's pretty freaking granular, right? I mean, as a marketer, what would I be selling to the person? Maybe a chainsaw sharpening tool. I mean, I could get that level of specificity, but I could be a different marketer who's actually trying to sell new chainsaws. Because if you've ever tried to sharpen a chainsaw, it's a pain in the freaking ass. Nobody wants to sharpen a chainsaw. Maybe you put a new chain on it, That's actually a lot easier than sharpening the chainsaw. And then you may not even be handy enough to do that. So you just go and get a new chainsaw, right? So you can advertise to that kind of individual, right? The person who would be reading this content, you can say that's the kind of person who's also going to buy a leaf blower. So I want to advertise my leaf blower to that person. So you've got everything from the domain level categorization, which is pretty broad, all the way up to the keyword level of categorization. You lost targeting within the open web, but you still have it in over-the-top CTV to the individual households and over-the-top TV. As a matter of fact, Netflix just announced, I think a week ago, that they're probably going to come out with a cheaper tier of Netflix that was ad-supported. And Netflix will be able to use Experian data and all sorts of third-party data tools to append onto your account who you are and give advertisers that level of targeting. So, Ryan Reynolds sold his creative agency to a company called Mountain, which is in that business of doing hyper-targeted over-the-top TV advertising. And so that at least gets you down to the household level. Doesn't get you down to the individual level, but household's actually pretty good for a lot of targeting. So, you can do site level targeting programmatically, and site level is at the domain. That gets you pretty close to what you want to do. Location is really, really important. Location tells us a lot, right? This is a map of the household income by zip +4 within the Manhattan area and Brooklyn area, and Staten Island as well there in Queens. So clearly, a lot of times you can get pretty close to who you're trying to reach using location as a proxy for wealth or income. But also location tells us a lot about where we are right now. So if you're logged into the Wi-Fi right now and you go to Google and you type, what is my IP? You're going to get that IP address. Everybody who's on the Wi-Fi will get that IP address because it's shared to the entire world. That's the public IP address for this hotel. So if you want to reach everybody in this hotel who's using the Wi-Fi today, you could do that. It's a pain in the butt, but you could use a DSP. And you could say, I want to bid against ad inventory in this hotel today because it's got digital marketers in it. I want to reach them. I didn't go through the hassle of doing that, but I could have done that on my way here. I could have put my banners up there, right? And they would have reached you if you were on the Wi-Fi. Now, if you were just using your 4G connection, I wouldn't have been able to do that, but a lot of your apps still actually allow for ads to be targeted at the same level of granularity. So I could have used a geofence, which is that other image with the circle around. I could have used a geofence using mobile advertising to accomplish the same thing, not using IP address. So geography tells you a lot about an individual. Obviously, if you're in a mall, well, you're in a mall. That's useful. It's useful to know if you have a store in the mall. It's useful to know if you're trying to target people who hang out in malls. People forget that there's other forms of marketing besides digital, and some of them are going digital, right? So direct mail has sort of gotten back into vogue because it's become digital. My agency did it, actually acquired some direct mail companies, and I invented a technology that uses QR codes that are unique to the individual mail recipient, right? So it tells the person who's receiving the mail that that piece of mail is unique to them, and there's a special offer just for them if they scan the QR code. If you guys scan this QR code, actually, you'll end up seeing Sweeps for a Cause, which is one of Giving Forward's current initiatives, which is a $4,000 sweepstakes that you can enter for free, or you can choose to donate in exchange for entries. So I welcome you all to try that, because if one of you won, regardless of whether you donated or not, it would make for a really good story. So please scan that and enter at least for free so that I have a fun story to tell next year when I come back. So direct mail is back, and direct mail allows you to append a huge amount of data to a file before you mail it. The Experians and TransUnions of the world probably know what color underwear I have on. It's sort of creepy. They certainly know what color underwear I purchased. They might not know if I have it on right now, but it's pretty damn close. So these data companies just have a tremendous amount of data, and you can use that within CTV, and you can use that within direct mail. So that might be another channel that you might want to consider. So Happy to answer any questions. We have about 4.5 minutes left. I covered a tremendous amount of stuff from earned media into paid media, so happy to answer a question. You have to speak into, I think, one of the orange cubes, which I think somebody might bring over to you. Give it just a second.
So I wonder if you have any advice for customer lists that are very small, because I have some clients that, well, we work for an agency, but the customer lists are just so small, and it's the frequency is very high, and it might fatigue people who are receiving the ads. So do you have any advice with that?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully your list is big enough to at least achieve the threshold of having a custom audience. You'll have a certain match rate. You need to match a certain number within each of the platforms in order to even have a custom audience. And then with regards to burnout of that list, I recommend that you just do a lot more creative execution, because people miss most of the creative anyway. And as long as you keep the frequency caps modest, but you just do a lot of creative, that can be very helpful. However, that's only really worth doing if the value of the customer is sufficiently high to justify the investment, right? So if you were telling me that you're selling, stuffed animal bears, it'd be one thing. If you told me that the client is selling MRI machines at $3.6 million each, different dynamic, right? So it's worth chasing down the procurement manager at the hospital who's going to be buying an MRI machine, but maybe not my daughter to buy a fluffy animal, right? So you have to sort of understand the dynamics as you deploy, creative against the specific audience, if it's worth the production cost, the deployment cost on it. Any other questions?
Yeah. Is this
Okay.
on? I don't know. Okay, great. So you're talking about these companies that have a lot of data that can be leveraged, right? Like you're talking about your underwear, all this stuff. And I'm coming from a background that is a bit more content oriented, or I would say it is a bit more, like in-house creative, that kind of stuff. But I'm transitioning roles, and I'm curious about ways that you can actually go about leveraging this sort of like very expansive amount of data, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to target this audience on this platform. Like, you know what I mean?
I think I know what you're getting at. Is you're trying to say, is the data valuable from a sort of a content ideation perspective? And it can be.
Well, I'm asking, like, how do you go about directly like interfacing and like utilizing that data?
A lot of that has to do with just getting the right message to the right people at the right time. But sometimes that data can also be used to help guide your editorial process, right? Because you've got a lot of things you could talk about if you have a specific target market that you're going after, or a specific product or service that solves a specific set of problems, right? So then if you can sometimes use that data to help you define personas, for example, understand different personas. And again, depending on the value of those personas and the sizes of those relative audiences, it might be worth creating different creative for them, right? And that's the math that you have to do, because creative is expensive to create, although now the bar has been lowered. For a lot of categories of marketing, you can get away with sort of man in the street, sort of low production quality creative, whereas 15 years ago, you would have needed to do studios and do titling and do fancy intros and outros on the video. And so now you can possibly just create a content engine around that, and it'd be much more efficient around it. I think we've got time for one more question. There we go.
Hi. Going back to the slide where you have all the streams working together, I think that's amazing. It's also sometimes easier said than done. And so just wondering if you have any ideas on how to maybe unify all of these channels to work together, because yes, like if you have a campaign, all of these channels might independently do their own thing, but it's hard to sometimes get everyone on the same page with different calendars and things like that. So what's something that's worked for you that has helped to align all of these channels for the same goal?
It really depends on the agencies that you've got, if you're the client, and then what resources you have at the client. If you're who's the general contractor of the marketing campaign, right? Sometimes the agency acts as a general contractor and uses subject matter experts, either in-house or external, and then coordinates with an internal social media manager potentially. Sometimes that's owned by a marketing manager within the company. And so it really depends on the way that the company is structured as well as how the departments are structured and how they will interact together. And there's always room for improvement on that. It's never like a set it and forget it. Sometimes it's a matter of, creating a new Slack channel or finding ways to coordinate editorial calendars better together. It's a work in progress. So there's no silver bullet for it, unfortunately. So thanks so much. We're out of time. I got to leave room for the next speaker. Thanks again.